Hello, folks. Welcome. I know we've got a decent crowd here today, and welcome back to our new weekly series that we've begun that we call NDN Talks. And it's every Tuesday, 1 o'clock Eastern Time, live. It'll be just this kind of format where we'll be talking with some of the most thoughtful and innovative people that we know to try to bring them to you. The way I describe this talk series is that these are the people that I kind of want to spend more time with, people that I've learned from over the years. Last week, we had Congressman Scott Peters, who talked about the congressional agenda. This cycle, we had Ruth Ben-Gayed, who's a historian many of you have seen on television. She's a prominent historian of fascism in the United States. We had Ruben Gallego talking about the transformation of Arizona. These are all people who are pushing the envelope on the cutting edge of thinking and work that needs to be done to keep our country prosperous and safe in this challenging time. And so today I'm really excited to share with you some discussion with Glenn Kirschner. I mean, I don't know that Glenn and I have actually ever met in person. He's, what I call one of my Twitter friends or one of my internet friends that we've all met in this crazy time battling Trump and the rise of the authoritarian Republican Party. Glenn wrote a piece back in, he's a former prosecutor, a football star. I read Glenn, I didn't know this in college, but he's been, I think, one of the most important, to me, when he goes on to television and talks about the legal side of all the things that have been happening in the United States over the last few years, he makes so much sense to me. I feel like I can understand what he's saying. I'm not a lawyer, and I deeply respect the profession, and he's been, I think, a very powerful interpreter for millions of people over the last couple of years to help us understand the legal side of the whole Trump era. And he wrote a piece back at the end of 2018 for NBC News on the need to rethink the way that we hold presidents accountable for election crimes or high crimes, whatever we want to call them. And it was a very influential piece to me because it made it clear that we have to think about these kinds of crimes, election crimes, crimes against our democracy, not as campaign finance crimes, not as locker room talk, not as things that are easy to dismiss, but frankly, in some of the most significant crimes that a politician can commit, particularly a president, and that our ability to understand the gravity of what Trump has done, I think, has not been adequate to the moment. And it's one of the reasons that he's been able to walk, I think, twice now in these impeachment proceedings. So I asked Glenn to join us, and I just wanted to say, welcome, Glenn. Thank you for being here. These go about 30, 35 minutes, folks, if you can fasten your seatbelt for what's going to be a great conversation. And Glenn, I know you've been very active. I've seen you on TV a lot in the last couple of days. You've been producing these great videos that you produce for your community. Give us your thoughts about what happened last week and how we should be thinking about, the challenges going forward.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Simon, for those kind words. January 6th, I think, is a day that will and should live in infamy because we had a president of the United States launch an attack on the US Capitol, on our democratic processes, in an unlawful, a corrupt attempt to retain power. And, let me front this because I hear so many people saying it's so hard to prove corrupt intent under these circumstances in order to support a criminal charge against the president. Nonsense. I spent 30 years proving corrupt intent, or at least trying, in courtrooms, both military and civilian. And it's not that hard to prove corrupt intent because the law tells us you infer intent from what? From conduct, from behavior, from words. Donald Trump's behavior was corrupt from start to finish vis-a-vis the election. And give me 30 minutes in front of a jury, I'll prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. When he started before the first ballot was cast, saying, if I lose this election, it's a fraud. It's fixed. It's rigged against me. So he was setting this up corruptly from jump. He then, of course, lost in what was, I think, darn near a landslide. He lost handily, right? And then he just started telling the big lie. And he knew it was a lie. He is, he is not so stupid that he could believe he actually won. And this lie that he told was so transparently corrupt, and really only the gullible could be fooled and are willing to be fooled, and that's why they follow him. But that big lie, the extreme campaign to get all of his supporters to the district on January 6th, because it will be wild and we will stop what's going on in the Capitol, because they stole it all from us. They stole it all from you, and we're not going to let that happen. And then he riled them up, some of them with body armor and helmets, lots of makeshift weapons. He pointed his weapon of choice at the US Capitol and he fired. So there are two things we have to prove. We have to prove a corrupt act, and we have to prove a corrupt mental state, corrupt intent, criminal mens rea. The act is everything I just described. He told people expressly, go up the street and stop what is going on. And what was going on is the certification of Joe Biden's win. What they did was they followed his command to the letter. To the letter. There is the act. It is a criminal act. How do we know he had criminal intent? Because everything he did from start to finish was from a platform of fraud, the big steal. This case, in my opinion, the prospective criminal case against Donald Trump for launching an attack against the US Capitol, is a laydown winner, as long as we can get a fair jury. Of course, we just had an unfair jury in the impeachment hearing. It's not a jury. We should stop calling it an impeachment trial, because that's misleading and it sets up false expectations that anything that goes on in the Senate during an impeachment proceeding, it bears any resemblance to a trial. It doesn't. I mean, the jurors themselves were witnesses to the insurrection, victims of the insurrection. Some of them, it looks like, may be aiders and abettors to the insurrection. Not exactly your fair jury. So now it's time for all of this to move into the courts of law. We start with a grand jury investigation, full, fair, aggressive, apolitical grand jury investigation, because nobody can make the decision about whether what Donald Trump did, not only in the run-up to January 6th, but on January 6th, including not refusing to stop the attack and sending tweets out that were designed, I think, to confirm the righteousness of what those insurrectionists were doing inside the Capitol as they were chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." And Donald Trump tweeted out, Mike Pence wasn't strong enough to do what needed to be done. This is insanity. This is a criminal case that is screaming to be brought on behalf of the American people. So I got a little sidetracked, but the only body that I believe can appropriately make the decision whether there's adequate evidence to charge Donald Trump with all of those crimes, and then we can work our way back to before he was elected illegally, courtesy of his campaign finance violations and his conspiracy with Michael Cohen, is the grand jury. The grand jury, sitting as the conscience of the community, needs to hear all of this evidence. And then fair-minded prosecutors need to ask the grand jury, as a result of everything you've heard, do you believe there's adequate evidence to indict Donald Trump for crimes attendant to what he did on January 6th? And the grand jury, sitting as the conscience of the community, needs to make that decision. We can't short circuit that by having somebody at the department say, I don't, it's too hard to try a president. It's an uphill climb. We don't want to take a shot at the king unless we know we can kill him. Nonsense. This is about the process, and we have to let the process run its course fully, ethically, apolitically, and aggressively, because our democracy deserves it, because Donald Trump just tried to kill our democracy.
Glenn, do you think that one of the reasons that the managers, the impeachment managers, accepted the testimony of the potential witness, the Congresswoman, on Saturday, because by being able to read it into the record, it helped confirm what you were saying about mens rea, right, about state of mind, meaning that if the president openly refused to prevent, to diffuse what was happening there, it confirmed his intent, right? It seemed like Jamie Raskin and the lawyers, when they spoke about this, the lawyers in that group, it seemed like they were very focused on this being really critical in establishing a deeper understanding of mens rea, when they spoke about it. Do you think that's part of the reason they were willing to take the deal so quickly?
They did a brilliant job, first of all. It was a masterclass in prosecution. And I think a lot of politics went into their decision to, this is just me projecting, went into taking that deal. First of all, again, it's not a trial. There are no rules of evidence. The last impeachment hearing had no witnesses. So the whole thing is a bit of political theater, in my opinion. Nobody's voting based, well, many people are not voting based on the evidence. They're voting based on their own political interests and allegiances, alliances. I think they probably took the stipulation as some kind of a compromise, because I know the Republicans were threatening to call 1,000 witnesses and drag them all up to Philadelphia or wherever they were going to go. So I think it was something of a compromise to keep the process from getting so bogged down, extending the time, because, I think we would all like to see that body doing some real legislating. And we would all like to see Joe Biden, be able to, for example, have a confirmation hearing for his attorney general. And I hope we talk about Merrick Garland at some point here. So I think it was a compromise because they wanted to bring an end to it, because I think they also recognized that they could call 100 witnesses who could enlighten us all even more about Donald Trump's intent throughout, even though it was obvious. And it was not going to change the minds of 40 some odd Republicans. Witnesses are something that we have at a trial, not necessarily at an impeachment hearing. So insisting on more things that made it feel a little bit more like a trial really were largely all for naught. So I think a bunch of things factored into that decision. I do not think it's the wrong decision. I would have liked to have seen witnesses. 22 of my 30 years as a prosecutor, I handled murder cases and RICO cases in DC. A marquee witness in every violent crime trial and every murder trial is either the victim, if the victim survived, or a surviving family member, for example, the mother of the decedent. That is an important moment in a homicide trial. I would have loved to have seen, not for maudlin reasons, Brian Sicknick's mother come in and put a real face, a human face, on the loss and the suffering of the Sicknick family at the hands of Donald Trump sending his insurrectionists to the Capitol. That might have driven home for the viewers, for the American people, maybe even for some of the Republican senators, the way Donald Trump blew a hole in a family and in a community that will never close. So, but I'm not surprised that we ended up where we ended up.
So Glenn, let's talk about Merrick Garland, and because he will be involved in the decision if there actually ends up becoming a prosecution of the president in the way you were describing earlier. What are the steps that have to happen and what's the role of Merrick Garland in this, and what are your hopes and aspirations for his time as Attorney General?
Oh, I have high hopes and enormous aspirations because we've been waiting for justice for so long. We keep waiting for somebody to gallop in on the white horse, and it's not going to happen. It wasn't Bob Mueller. It won't be Joe Biden not acting alone. It won't be Merrick Garland. It takes all of us preaching to the choir. My hopes for Merrick Garland. I don't know him. I've met him exactly once, I think. I have friends who have worked with him fairly closely over the years, have uniformly remarkable things to say about him. The way I see him is through some of the experiences that I know he had, So he prosecuted Marion Barry, the former mayor of Washington, D.C., for the whole, crack cocaine thing out of my former office, the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. So I think in a very real sense, you can say he cut his prosecutorial teeth on public corruption cases in part. He then headed up in remarkable fashion both the investigation and the prosecution of the Oklahoma City bombing case, one of the most at that time, the most consequential domestic terrorism case we ever had to contend with in our country. And one of the quotes that always will stay with me is he said, we will, I'm going to paraphrase, I don't remember his exact language and I'm not as eloquent as him. We will hold accountable everybody who was involved. And it wasn't just Timothy McVeigh, remember. We will hold everybody accountable for what just happened in Oklahoma City, but we will do it in a way that honors the Constitution. And that's exactly what he did. And by all accounts, various law enforcement agencies that were part of that joint effort had nothing but praise for the way Merrick Garland conducted and oversaw, supervised that investigation and prosecution. The way I see it, taking just those two incidents, of course, he's a remarkable jurist. Some on the left think he's too pro-law enforcement. He's like the perfect marriage of public corruption experience and domestic terrorism experience as a prosecutor. And Donald Trump, including what he did on January 6th, he is the unholy marriage of public corruption and domestic terrorism. And that's why I have high hopes that Merrick Garland is the right man for the moment. And I believe he is. Some people say he seems quiet. He may not be aggressive enough. I don't know him personally. I'm hoping he's a quiet storm and that he does what is necessary to hold Donald Trump accountable, Simon, for the unbelievable, unabated crime spree that started long before Donald Trump got into politics in New York, but it started in earnest when he entered into a conspiracy with Michael Cohen to violate campaign finance laws by buying off the Stormy Daniels and the Karen McDougal's to secrete from the American people deeply damaging, politically damaging information that gave him an unfair advantage and that put the American voters at a disadvantage. And then, and I know this is something that you and I have talked about a lot in recent years, then after he stole the presidency, courtesy of that crime, burying that information criminally from the American voter, courtesy of his coordination with Russia, extreme coordination with Russia, he then held up the shield of presidential immunity. He stole his position as president, and then he benefited from the theft because we have this horrific opinion from the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel saying, we don't think it's a good idea to be able to criminally arrest, indict, or try a criminal president while he's in office. Doesn't matter what crimes he is committing in plain sight, he is untouchable. Well, when you steal the very shield that you then hold up against accountability for your crimes, in how many ways is that an insane way for a democracy to operate?
Well, and what you predicted in the piece that you wrote in 2018 was that because of if this continues, it's an incentive to cheat more. The candidate who cheats more and more egregiously will win. And the candidate who doesn't cheat and doesn't use the advantage of cheating will lose. And then the person who gets prosecuted is the loser, not the winner. And that this is so at odds with the way the democratic incentive system should work that it's become a catastrophe. And what you predicted was everything that we just saw, that Trump would cheat more and be more outrageous because he needed to win in order to keep the shield that you're describing in place to prevent him from being, from being prosecuted. And this is what people like Ruth Ben-Gayat and others who've studied authoritarian regimes talk about how this cycle of needing to stay in office to protect themselves from being prosecuted is often what happens in other countries, that the theft and the illegality of the early days of the administration then requires them to stay in office forever and to pass the office down to their children, because once they lose that shield that you're describing, then they become vulnerable to prosecution. And so what Glenn is arguing, and I think this is something that needs to be seriously considered by the new team, is that there has to be some exemption to the DOJ no prosecution rule for crimes that are involving elections and attacks on democracy. They can't be seen as the same type of crimes because of what he just described. And I think this is one of the most important things, frankly, that, I've worked in elections since the late 1980s. I've been involved in all sorts of crazy things that have happened. And I think that this is a huge insight into something that's gone really wrong, that if we don't fix soon, is creating the conditions of future Donald Trumps or Don Juniors or others to come along. And because it's an incentive, we've created now a permanent incentive to cheat. And my God, what could be more at odds with a democracy than that? It's incredible. So Glenn, I appreciate your
it's like, first of all, the Constitution actually has a mechanism to have some of your constitutional protections yield if you're engaged in wrongdoing, right? So, for example, we have this thing called forfeiture by wrongdoing. Right. Everybody enjoys a Sixth Amendment right to confront and cross-examine the witness against them. But you lose that right if you kill the witness against you, right? The same principle, that's a criminal law principle, the same principle of forfeiture by wrongdoing ought to apply to a president or a politician who steals the election. They ought not be able to use the status they stole to protect them against accountability for the theft in the first place. Because if not, as you say, well, then we will have a sort of a perpetual criminal in office, and there will be no way to dislodge him. And let me also add that the OLC policy, the memo against prosecuting a sitting criminal president, has no legal authority behind it. There's no Supreme Court case. There is no statute that gives the president this protection. The OLC attorneys at one point just said, you know what, we think a president's going to be so darn busy running the country, he should be unburdened by having to defend against a prosecution. I'm sorry, if we ever took that into court and challenged it, I predict 10 judges out of 10 and 9 justices out of 9 would likely say, that's not a thing. There's no legal authority supporting that you cannot prosecute a sitting criminal president.
So let me ask one more question, then we'll open it up. I know we've got some Q&A, some folks wanting to jump in here. Describe to us, the department, the FBI and the DOJ and local law enforcement now have arrested over 200 people who came inside the Capitol on January 6th. Those trials would be taking place over, let's say, the next, 2 years, 2 to 3 years. What should we expect to come from that in terms of the information that get coughed up? How many of these folks are going to turn on other people? How does that become the bottom of the pyramid, let's say, of years and years of future prosecutions that could then start getting into elected officials and even to the president? How do we expect that to play out?
These are, all relatively low-level players in the insurrection. I assume, I'm not privy to the information that's being developed by my former colleagues at the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. I have every reason to believe both the FBI and the federal prosecutors handling this case are taking it as seriously as it needs to be taken and working it as aggressively as it needs to be worked in the grand jury. I think you're unlikely to build a RICO prosecution. I know that's been discussed. This doesn't feel like a RICO organization to me, the way that the mob does, or some of the big gang cases that our friends like Amy Jeffers put together against the largest violent crime and drug organization ever to run the drug trade in DC. This doesn't feel like that. This feels like a lot of relatively low-level motley crews who were so ginned up by Donald Trump's lies and rhetoric and hate that they did what they did on January 6th. Now, I think it may have the fringe benefit of making some real inroads into some of the white supremacist organizations, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. And so I think actually those investigations could yield some real benefit to the American people by taking us from the insurrection and the planning that went into it and the organization of some of these white supremacist groups that were involved into a larger investigation into those white supremacist groups. So I think that may be a sort of side investigative alley that we go down that will bear some really important fruit, because we'll be able to get after those larger white supremacist gangs and maybe really dismantle them. I don't think it builds up to the president, but I don't think it has to build up to the president, because all of the evidence is already there on tape in his tweets. And Simon, what we don't know is what went on behind the scenes. We got a little flavor of it, like when he tells McCarthy things like, I guess they care more about the election results than you do. We got some flavors of it, but you know, so it could become more consequential to the president beyond what we already know.
So 2 questions have come in, Glenn. And so from Vince Felici, Republican campaign consultants were involved in the organization of the rally on January 6th. There were over $3 million spent by the Trump campaign on consultants and operations. Can those consultants who promoted the event be prosecuted? If they are not, they and other favoring GOP consultants would continue to use the same recipe in 2022 and 2024.
Yeah, so this is not a cop-out, but every time I'm asked the question, can they be prosecuted or can they be successfully prosecuted? My answer is always the devil's in the details, and the details have to go before the grand jury. Because, you know, when you're talking about simply funding, let me be generous and call it a rally on January 6th, it really comes down to, what did you know as a person who was funding the January 6th get together in Washington? What did you know? What did you intend? For example, did you say, listen, we need to get some violent Proud Boys there so they can force their way into the Capitol, and I'm willing to put money behind that? That simple sentence I just articulated would answer the question, can they be prosecuted, in the affirmative? We don't know, and we won't know until we develop all of the evidence. It certainly can be investigated. I would argue there's adequate predication to investigate the funding of the insurrectionists, you know, traveling there, supporting them in any number of ways. There's enough to open an investigation. Then we have to let the evidence be our guide.
Well, and one of the most interesting things from the impeachment manager's presentation last week that was new information was that the application for the permit changed. That the original permit did not allow a march from the ellipse to the Capitol. And then the White House got involved and changed it to allow a march. And obviously the federal permitting is controlled by the president. And so one of the things that I think we haven't totally processed yet is that the name of this event was the Save America March. The march was to the Capitol was in the name of the actual event itself. They have no way of claiming that they didn't know the march to the Capitol was going to happen, particularly when they changed the permit to allow the march to take place, right? And after the original permit was more of a rally or a protest. And so I do think that the concept, I've written a lot in my Twitter feed and on our website about people needing to process what the Save America March meant as a clear indicator of what the intent of the day was. They were there to save America by preventing Joe Biden from being president, and they were doing so through a violent march to the Capitol. To your point, Glenn, it's all out there. Right? Like, it's not, you don't have to be a super lawyer to figure all this stuff out. They were much more overt about what they were doing than I think people really understand. Let me get to one last question, and then we'll let you go, Glenn. This is from Wilson Golden. What's your assessment of the Fulton County DA's chances towards Trump, and do you think that's what will that bear fruit, do you think?
Yeah, it's a crime in Georgia to solicit an election official to alter a vote count. which is what Donald Trump did in the audio recorded phone call. I expect to see charges. I can't imagine not seeing charges. And the first thing I thought of when I first heard that phone call, Simon, was I thought back to like when we would be introducing wiretap evidence and we would have our co-conspirators on the phone talking dirty, talking about crime. And, they were at least smart enough to try to disguise what they were really talking about. So for whatever reason, the drug dealers love to call kilos of cocaine the football, right? Very slick. So, I'm going to need about maybe like 5 footballs for tomorrow's game. You got me? Yeah, I got you. Okay. We knew that footballs meant kilos of cocaine. Donald Trump didn't even try to disguise it. Donald Trump said, I need you to give me one more vote, then I need to win the election. Thank you. And then he leveled a number of threats that were not all that subtle. That, again, that's a case, if I know nothing after 30 years in courtrooms, I know a provable case when I see it. That's a lay down winner. Those cases in Georgia have to be brought.
Even my 15-year-old daughter, we were in the car the other day, and she's not a very politically engaged person. And the story was on about Fulton County. And she said, Dad, do you know that Donald Trump asked for one more vote than he needed? Like, she already knew. And she's like, is he that stupid? I mean, it was her reaction was like, even I know as a 15-year-old freshman in high school, how like dumb that is. And it was shocking to her how, just to your point about how naked and unadorned it all was, right? Glenn, let's we're hitting close to the end of our time. What I would like to do is just any final thoughts about all this. I mean, I think what I'm really focused on is that I'm going to try to work in the coming months once everything settles down to really try to help you make the case inside the Department of Justice to do something with the memo, right? Whether it's to create an exemption if they don't want to get rid of it altogether. But in terms of the many reforms that have to come into place to shore up our democracy that has been attacked and weakened by Trump's presidency, this issue of not being able to be prosecuted for election crimes is a dangerous development in our system. And it's something that, we all know why it happens, right? There's sort of a mutually assured destruction pact where neither party sort of prosecutes electoral crimes against the other one, right? I mean, it's, we have the federal system, the FEC is a toothless tiger on purpose, right? So that politicians don't get, there isn't a threat and fear of this, but this was so egregious and it created the exact circumstances that you warned against, which is an escalation in the cheating in order to become more effective. And this is what Trump did. I mean, Trump, think about what Trump did. He not only attacked our elections, which is something that was built into the Constitution, but he also attacked the census and the post office, 2 other things that go back to the 18th century that are foundational institutions and processes that were created to further our democracy. And so his assault on the system started long before Election Day. And I think that, Louis, DeJoy is still there at the post office. I don't think he'll be there much longer, but it is, when you look at the totality of his assault on this election and then the continuation afterwards, it is Olympian in scale in what he tried, which is exactly what you warned, Glenn, in 2018, that the obvious incentive now is to not cheat a little bit or cheat, a medium amount, but to go for the whole thing, right? Because if he wins, he stays, only by winning do you keep the shield. And that's exactly what Trump did. And so we now know how dangerous this is. And I look forward to working with you in the coming months to try to make this case to the new team at the Justice Department. But any final thoughts before we head off today?
Yeah, I think the final thoughts are Trump committed so many crimes that I believe are easily provable. I mean, we haven't even talked about the 10 potential felony obstruction of justice counts that Bob Mueller meticulously documented in volume 2 of the Trump-Russia report. I tried a case that Bob Mueller indicted when he was chief of homicide. And let me tell you, Bob Mueller knows how to investigate and document crime. And so those crimes, I believe, have to be taken up, as I think we need to consider all of the avoidable coronavirus deaths, courtesy of the misrepresentations, being generous, of, Pence and Trump and Jared Kushner. But here's the overarching principle, Simon. There is a strong urge, I think, in the American population generally, to put Donald Trump in our rearview mirror and then break our rearview mirror off and not deal with what he just put America through for the past 4 years. That is the dead wrong approach. That is the opposite of a prescription for healing, for justice, for accountability. In my 30 years, I never once told a victim of a crime, the way I'm going to help you heal, the way I'm going to help you move past this, the way I'm going to achieve justice is to decline to prosecute your attacker, is to decline to hold your attacker accountable. If we don't go about trying to hold Donald Trump and everybody else accountable for the crimes against the United States, for what he's just put us all through for 4 years, then I think we're slouching toward the end of our republic, because what we're doing is we're encouraging the next Donald Trump, I can't imagine what that would look like, to replicate what Donald Trump just got away with and probably even ratchet it up. So not just on the election fraud front, but on all fronts. We have to do the hard work of accountability for Donald Trump and everybody in his orbit that was criminally enabling, supporting him, and participating in those crimes. We have to.
Your lips to God's ears, Glenn. And I'm with you 100%. And I can tell you that I know from being inside the Democratic Party, smart, chattering classes, that this tension between wanting to move on and needing to create an accountability is an incredible tension. There's been an ongoing debate about this for years. You and I have discussed this many times, and I don't know where we're going to end up. I think this is, but I'm with you. I mean, I think that anyone who follows our work here knows that I think we can do both. I think we can pass good legislation and make sure that we preserve our democracy, our republic. And, the accountability piece is going to be really critical, because if there isn't a clear signal sent, and this is why what happened last week was so dangerous for the country, if there isn't a clear signal sent that if you do these kinds of things, you will get in trouble, then we're creating an incentive for, catastrophe here. And I think we're very close. I mean, we didn't even really talk about what's happened with the Republican Party, but the fact that there's been no organized effort by the Republicans to walk away from the radicalization that's happened, to accept the outcome of the election, to call Joe Biden a legitimate president, that they've accepted that this is now a normal part of what it means to be a Republican. We are in a dangerous time, and we've got the work we've all been doing, which I think we thought was going to be over after Election Day, unfortunately isn't. And in some ways, the most important work we have to preserve our democracy may be ahead of us, not behind us. And so, Glenn, thank you. I hope we'll be holding hands in this battle together. Appreciate your courage and your willingness just to lay it all out there. It's been inspiring to me as just a citizen. Keep up the good work, and let us know what we can do to help you.
Thank you, Simon. Appreciate it.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right.